Final Fantasy XIV's Black Mage is notorious for being an incredibly easy to misunderstand job, combined with being the closest we have to a classic fantasy mage, which tends to further amplify the misunderstandings with new players picking up the job and going, "I want to focus on ice," or "I want to be a thunder mage," or "I like fire spells." Although, weirdly, that last one is more rare, probably because using the fire spells quickly leads you to realize those spells just don't work on their own. We'll be going over 5 of the more common pitfalls of Black Mage, highlighting how they might come about, and also explain why they are so wrong. But before that, let's briefly go over the basics of the Black Mage rotation, so in case you don't know, you have a better chance of following why these alternative rotations are so wrong. First, Astral Fire increases the damage of fire spells by 40, 60 and 80% respectively, which, simply put, means that fire spells always easily beat equivalent ice spells in raw power. Fire 1 in Astral Fire 3 has a 324 potency compared to Blizzard 4's 320, and that's without counting the fact Fire 1 can produce free and instant Fire 3s, which are even stronger. Ice spells are exclusively used to recover MP, meaning that Black Mages switch into Ice mode specifically to recover MP, and should be looking to exit this mode at once MP has been maxed out. Thunder spells apply damage over time effects, and typically are among your strongest spells in total power, but only if you make sure to reapply the effect when it is about to end. This combination leads to the basic rotation of Black Mage to be to cast a Thunder spell whenever the Thunder effect is not active on their target or is about to run out. Then casting Fire spells until you run completely out of MP, and then switching to Umbral Ice and casting Ice spells until you fully max out on MP. By level 35, this is usually done by simply entering with Blizzard 3 and then casting either Blizzard 1 or Blizzard 4 if learned, and then you're essentially done, and of course using Paradox once that is learned. For the Fire side of things, this is typically engaged with Fire 3 and involves, at low level, casting Fire 1 as much as you can, spending the free Fire 3s that may come about, until you can't anymore. By level 60, this is replaced with casting Fire 4 like 3 to 4 times, followed by Fire 1 or Paradox, followed by more Fire 4s, as well as rounding out each Astral Fire step with, for example, a Flare or, at higher level, Despair. During all of this, Thunder is sprinkled in as needed, and other spells like Xenoglossy are also simply used where it makes sense. But the basic rotation is simply use Thunder when the effect isn't there, use Fire Magic until you run dry of MP, then use Ice Magic until you're full, and then back to Fire. Blizzard 3 and Fire 3 are designed to be bad to cast for anything except the utility of switching mode, except with the Firestarter trait, removing those weaknesses from Fire 3. Pretty simple, right? In practice, it gets a lot more complicated, but with the ground rules in order, let's get to those off-track rotations. Number 1. The Ice Mage. This one is a classic. Essentially, it is a Black Mage that refuses to use fire spells, often also refusing to use thunder spells, although weirdly, they will use spells like Xenoglossy and Foul if they get that far before changing course. To put it into perspective how massive the power difference between ice and fire spells are, even though Fire 4 has a slightly higher cast time, the Astral Fire bonus makes Fire 4 60% stronger than Blizzard 4 in potency per second. Another example is Flare, which does about 135% more damage than Freeze on just the AoE part. And of course, Fire 1, which does precisely 80% more damage than Blizzard 1. Simply put, the power difference between the elements is so colossal that there is no good reason to go full ice beyond, well, I don't know, doing a challenge run or something, but do that in your own time, don't rope strangers into that. That said, the most common reason for players to go Ice Mage is the simple Fantasy Mage reasoning. I want to be an Ice Mage, I don't like fire spells. And the only way to really approach that one is to explain that that is simply not how the game works. It would be a bit like going into a first-person shooter and only using the knife because you don't like to use guns. The second reason players go Ice Mage is another misunderstanding. The basic explanation of Umbral Ice and Astral Fire includes that they decrease the power of the opposite element. and in the case of fire, increases the power of fire. But it does not actually explain by how much. Let's just say that Fire 4 needs at least a 12% damage bonus just to break even with Blizzard 4 due to the longer cast time. And I mean, if I didn't know the exact damage bonus, I would also think that at least 40% bonus sounds absolutely ludicrous. So just reading the explanation, you're introduced to the fact that switching to Astral Fire from Umbral Ice comes at a damage loss before a damage gain. So what if the damage gain isn't worth it, right? However, as of Dawntrail, the 3 aspect mastery traits themselves explain exactly how much damage we're talking about. But then again, I at least get the impression that a lot of players forget to check the traits menu of their actions and traits, so big whoop on that one. If only the spells themselves included the explanation. Ah well, we don't have the technology for that, I suppose. The third common reason that players go Ice Mage, unfortunately, is, in my experience, simply laziness. The fact Black Mage is known to be so complicated causes some players to simply give up at the outset and take the quote-unquote easy way out and just use the ice spells. This has become even more of a potential issue with the Dawntrail changes of Umbral Soul. Using Umbral Soul freezes the Umbral Ice timer until you do something that interacts with Umbral Ice. Incidentally, Freeze and Blizzard 4 don't interact with Umbral Ice. As they don't change or refresh Umbral Ice, the timer simply sits stuck, making it irrelevant that they don't refresh the timer. Meaning that you could start a duty by casting Blizzard 1, Umbral Soul, and then simply use exclusively Blizzard 4, Freeze, Thunder spells, and Polyglot spells, and the timer will not budge, making it perfect if you're just really lazy. Unfortunately, it also makes your damage output much weaker, as previously mentioned. Number 2. The Balance Mage. This one can often come about by completely misunderstanding the way Astral Fire and Umbral Ice works from the very start. The initial version of it is alternating Fire 1 and Blizzard 1 in either order, and may be inspired by the fact that when you do alternate them, you spend much less MP than if you spam Fire 1. However, alternating them also means that you alternate between doing 180 potency and 162 potency, meaning that simply casting Blizzard 1 repeatedly would be better. By level 35, this gets even more awkward as the Balance Mage graduates to alternating Blizzard 3 and Fire 3. If you're not looking at the damage numbers, then alternating Blizzard 3 and Fire 3 effectively cuts their cast times in half, making it seem like you're doing something right, as your spells suddenly go faster. In reality, due to the GZD and the 30% potency loss from alternating, this leads to 196 potency spells, which I suppose is better than spamming Blizzard 1, but simply spamming Fire 1 in Astral Fire 3 is 65% better than that. I will concede that when moving greater distances, this kind of strategy can be handy for doing some damage while continuing to move. This can also be handy on AoE to access Thunder more frequently, of course using Fire 2 and Blizzard 2 instead, but it is certainly not optimal and not something to do on the regular. The way this kind of rotation comes about, I believe, is partly because it seems wrong to just cast the same spell over and over and over again, especially if you've played other non-mage jobs in Final Fantasy XIV by the time you pick up Black Mage. So alternating sounds right. If you didn't read the initial tutorial on Umbral Ice and Astral Fire and did not read the aspect mastery traits, and don't pay close enough attention to your damage numbers, which makes sense especially at lower levels where you're focusing on other things, then what you see is that doing this kind of rotation saves you MP and even makes your spells cast faster. It looks like everything is correct, even when it is not. It does demonstrate a complete lack of understanding for how the job functions though, which, again, is perfectly understandable given the complexity of even just the basics of Black Mage. Number 3. MP Battery Mage. This one is sort of an evolution of the Balance Mage and may even look similar or identical to Balance Mage in the wild. The logic of this one is to try and sit on a high MP amount to save for something. This means instead of just casting fire spells until you're completely dry and then going ice, it is more likely an MP Battery Mage will cast a few fire spells and then switch to ice to recover again so they never go down into super low MP amounts. Sometimes this leans into Balance Mage territory where they alternate Blizzard 3 and Fire 3 simply because doing so is completely free. This can come about because the Black Mage recognizes that ice spells fully recover their MP, but assume that, as a result, surely something that doesn't recover MP must be more damage focused. With the assumption that Balance Mages may likely come about as a result of not reading tooltips closely, another resulting behavior of the MP Battery Mage is to use all that accumulated MP on Flare. Surely, the more MP you have, the more damage it does. Right? Nope. For those out of the loop, Flare and Despair both state that they consume all of your MP, but what they don't tell you is that all of your MP counts as long as you have at least 800. As in, as long as you have 800 MP, you can spend all of that on Flare or Despair. Weird. But if you don't yet realize that ice spells recover your MP by this point, you could catch yourself in a loop of doing Balance Mage while waiting for MP to cast Flare. I know it sounds like a ludicrous rotation, but it also requires a handful of things to go wrong in the learning process to reach this point. Now, one point to the MP Battery Mage is that in a fantasy RPG like this, normally, surely, you have a lot of spells you need MP for, so spending all of it at once is dangerous, as you can't afford your other spells. Surely, it isn't trivial to recover it all again either, so holding your MP for when you really need to start blasting makes sense, right? Like, I'm just saying, I can see the logic in not spending all of it at once. Black Mage, unfortunately, just does not need that kind of safety. Number 4. Thunder Mage. This one is a lot more rare, but stems from the exact same kind of origin as a lot of Ice Mages. I like thunder magic. Before Dawntrail, this worked a bit better since you could simply spam thunder spells on various enemies and whenever Thundercloud procced, you got a big wham! In fact, on a large target count, simply spreading thunder to all the enemies one at a time and then just rapid firing thunderclouds at a prime target would actually be kinda nice. Mostly at lower levels, where you don't have, say, Fire 4. But at higher levels, it just doesn't pay well enough. Since Dawntrail, the Thunder Mage has gotten a lot more awkward and has more in common with the Balance Mage. Once again. Since Thunderhead is awarded every time you switch element, the most effective way to access Thunder spells repeatedly is to cast Thunder, Blizzard 3, Thunder, Fire 3, Thunder, and so on. Alternatively, while on the move, Thunder, Scathe, Transpose, Thunder, Scathe, Transpose, and so on is technically also a way to do it. The on-the-move strategy is actually kind of okay at lower levels. In fact, it can be your only decent option for things like when the tank pulls everything in Sastasha, but as you level up a bit, you will have plenty of better options, making this strategy entirely obsolete, especially because the upfront damage simply isn't good enough to warrant making Thunder your primary attack spell. One other cause of the Thunder Mage can also simply be a combo of Balance Mage and pressing the glowy button. They might genuinely be a Balance Mage of some sort, or an MP Battery Mage, but, you know, Thunder is free and the button is glowing, so, you know, why not? On most jobs, the glowy button is something you should use. Number 5. Scathe Mage. Scathe says that it does double damage with a 20% chance. If you read the tooltips of each spell you have, then at face value, Scathe has a 20% chance to do more damage than Fire and Blizzard, and if you don't understand how GCDs work, then Scathe is instant, so surely you get more of those, right? So it must be a good spell. This can sometimes end up combined with the Thunder Mage as previously mentioned, simply because Thunder does kind of okay damage and is free and also instant, so if you don't understand how the GCD works, it must be a good spell, right? In low levels, granted, when things die as fast as they do, Black Mage may actually be in a situation where nothing else is actually fast enough to connect. This could also lead Black Mage to just rely on that, even past the point where mobs stop dying too fast. The Scathe Mage, I would say, is a lot less common than the rest though. Bonus number 6, the Transpose Mage. I see this one mentioned every so often. No, it is not a mage that just spams Transpose. It is simply a Black Mage that learned how the job actually works, but didn't realize that Blizzard 2, 3, and Fire 2 and 3 at level 35 and beyond states that they both remove the opposite effect and max out the current effect. If they worked the same as Blizzard 1 and Fire 1, then casting Blizzard 3 from Astral Fire 3 would just reset you back to no state. So these kinds of players will use Transpose to enter Umbral Ice, then cast Blizzard 3. Then later transpose into Astral Fire, then cast Fire 3. It is an unfortunate misunderstanding, but in my experience, most of the time they go, "Oh, now I get it!" the moment they realize the full interaction of Blizzard 3 and Fire 3. So, do you know of any ridiculous Black Mage off-track rotations? Maybe you know of some absurd rotation that a different job performs? I would love to hear about them in the comments. And remember, try to help your fellow Black Mage back onto the track. And don't try to overwhelm them with the non-standard stuff right out the gate. Focus on the fundamentals. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, ice spells were only free in Umbral Ice 3, as opposed to Umbral Ice 1. And furthermore, Umbral Ice recovered MP by adding 30, 45, and 60% of your total MP to the passive MP recovery ticks that happen every 3 seconds. This meant Black Mages could put together rotations revolving around hanging out in Umbral Ice to passively recover instead of relying on actually casting ice spells to get the MP, which is part of what we called non-standard Black Mage at that time. The fact Umbral Ice didn't universally make ice free is also why Blizzard 4 and Freeze have an MP cost, despite being inaccessible outside of Umbral Ice.